Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to AIML week of Global Hack Week. And I saw that someone asked for the check in link. I'll get that to you straight away and then I'll go ahead and get started on artificial intelligence and machine learning within healthcare and biomedical research. So let me get that link to you right now. But in the meantime, how is everyone going? How is everyone doing? How are your days going? And all of that fun stuff. Hi, friends. Awesome. So, should be there now. I'll keep it up just in case anyone needs it. Yes. Hi, my name is Isabel. You can call me Isa. I am a coach here at Major League Hacking. I use she, her pronouns. And if you've been to my streams before, you will see that I have now racked up more hours of anime and I am now at 2,200 hours total. If you want to connect with me, Twitter, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn are up on the screen. And so, my plan is to go into what artificial intelligence was before, using my experience in machine learning as kind of like baseline. So everything before that and then everything after that, kind of. And then I want to go into why I think, at least I haven't been seeing like the same sentiment in my research, but kind of why tech is a little slower in medicine than anywhere else. Um, there's also I also want to go into any ethical considerations with regards to getting AI into medicine or getting it further. Thank you so much. I want to check that out. So someone said The Age of AI is a documentary. I'm gonna check it out. Thank you so much. Um, oh, I should probably say we're not getting started because we already started. Awesome. So um, the hi Matt. The history of artificial intelligence kind of started in the 1950s. That's when artificial intelligence as a term came about. But it wasn't exactly like the AI that we as technologists have come to know right now, where like, um, or actually, yeah. And the artificial intelligence that people knew of in the 50s was mostly in academia. So Dartmouth did a lot of research, MIT, of course, and a bunch of other schools within their computer science departments or whatever departments worked on artificial intelligence. As it went along in the 60s, folks got a little bit more optimistic and they kind of started predicting when they'd actually get AI. So, for example, in 1970, there was someone from Life magazine who said, in 3 to 8 years, we'll have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. So they said by 1978 we'd have AI. So that was a little inaccurate on their part. And it was more so that the theory was there, but getting the hurdle, which I'm going to go into as well in a couple of other slides, the hurdle there is getting from the proof of concept to something actually usable. Like the idea could be easy enough to get, right? Um, so in the 60s, they started predicting when they'd get AI. The government started getting involved. So that this is when DARPA was um, like in full swing. From my understanding, DARPA was what gave birth to the internet as we know of today. So even if they didn't succeed with artificial intelligence, they did get a few things right. um, People in the 60s were almost as ambitious with coming up with a hackathon project. I love that. So going into the 70s, when the predictions weren't met of, oh, we're going to get AI in a few years. Why is that squeaky? I hope you guys don't hear that. But um, funding started going away. And without funding, people couldn't go into more research. Um, on the other, so this is like from a US centric or like a Western centric. On the other hand, Japan with the, I think it's like fifth generation computer project is FGCP. They started going into artificial intelligence in their own way, or in their own like research labs. Um, but another thing that slowed the research for AI, which I have a quote on the right hand side that says, we saturate the capabilities of AI to the level of our current computational power and then wait for Moore's law to catch up. To those unfamiliar, Moore's law, I think, is summarized as if it can go wrong, it's going to go wrong. If I remember correctly, if someone wants to correct me, let me know. But basically, the computer storage and processing speed is one of the hurdles that we have with artificial intelligence, where the tech just isn't there, like, for example, if we want to bring it back to something that is more in today's age, for my capstone project, my team and I wanted to look into using computer vision to understand sign language. And I know y'all know, as hackathon going people, that folks have totally made like ASL understanding computer vision. But ASL is so much more than that. Like, for example, out of all the research that my team and I did, the furthest people have gone is the alphabet. And even then it's a little hard because there's like, for example, A, B, C, which is static. And then there's Z, which you literally have to draw out. And then M with the thumb coming out, and S where the thumb is outside, are very similar, especially in like dark lighting, or like this where there's no contrast, things like that. We could understand, we could have a proof of concept, but the computational power of understanding this versus, or like this versus this, and then going into, for example, phrases like I love you or thank you or something like that, the classes get so plenty that there's just not enough computational power to work with. So with that being said, those are some of the reasons why there was a halt in research into artificial intelligence. I saw some things in the chat, so I'm going to pause. We're at the 70s. If I get lost, I'm going to go into the 80s. How DARPA isn't more known since they were the first to start it up. Oh, so this is like a slight tangent, but what I understand from my research is that, for example, there is no one person attributed to creating the internet, but if there are different papers that are like, this particular person started it, this particular person started it, it's more like, there's also because you said IBM versus DARPA, right? DARPA is, for example, probably furthering the cause of the government, and IBM is furthering the cause of their revenue, which comes from giving it to the people. So their motivations are a little different. Like DARPA would probably want the most cutting edge thing. IBM might want the most cutting edge thing for everyone because they want people to use it. So they might want it to be user friendly, which DARPA might not care about as much because they probably just want, I don't know. The first thing I'm thinking of is like military contractor companies. But yeah, so open source version of ChatGPT shows the limitations of computational power. Yes, exactly. So that is a good point of like circling it back to our current day, where we still see the problems that we had from the literal 1970s into today, just because it's costly to run all of these computational heavy processes. So closed captions to be interactive with the stream. I don't, but I love that you brought up like accessibility, because I recently learned of a Google Chrome extension, if you do use Google Chrome, where any audio that's being said from the page will have closed captions. So maybe look into that. So it's not directly with Twitch, but it is with like your browser. So it might be a good Band-Aid. But going back, so I finished the 70s and I'm going into the 80s. This is when deep learning and expert systems got introduced. So, expert systems, the idea there was I'm going to train this model to act like an expert in the field. So, for example, someone who's an expert in climate change or someone who's an expert in plastic, where these systems are an expert in that field, usually trained with the information from like actual people who are experts. And then we also had deep learning, which is the concept of learning from previous iterations, and bringing that like lesson into the next iteration. Um, Going into the 90s, this is when corporations got involved. Going back to Yoshiru's question about DARPA versus IBM, IBM made Deep Blue. Google, I want to fix this because it wasn't actually Google who made AlphaGo, it was Alphabet. And then Alphabet owns DeepMind, and DeepMind made AlphaGo. But we just kind of summarized it because DeepMind and Google are from the same parent company. But there are differences. But yeah, so AlphaGo was this cool AI where it fought it played against and defeated the sort of like grandmaster version of Chinese Go, which, if you're not familiar, has a hell of a lot more steps and a hell of a lot more rules than chess. So when folks made chess AI, they stepped it up by making a Go AI. So that's when that happened in the 90s. And then at this point in the 90s, there wasn't enough government funding and public hype. So when people did research, it wasn't as like I don't want to say groundbreaking, but it wasn't as like prevalent. Like not everyone knew about it, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at, which is a good segue into like some other points that I want to make later. But in the 90s, we started getting into big data, where we are now able to train our artificial intelligence, our machine learning, etc., with information, like loads and loads of information, so that they become more accurate, they become like more specific to the task that it's trying to do. And this is, I think, a pivot from what I've seen, where artificial intelligence was very heavy on imitating humans, whereas now our AI, we don't, at least from like us as devs, I haven't seen like us trying to make AI into a person. It's more like um, with the big data, it is capable of seeing things in this large like stream of information in ways that we cannot. Um, I guess there's a pivot there. I didn't like go into research with that particular like sentiment, but it's still like worth like noting, I guess. Um, LMAO with the cat enjoying the stream. I'm going. Oh, slight tangent. I thought this was super cool. So this image is from the 2000s, right? And it's a female professor from MIT. She created Kismet, which was a robot that was the first one who was capable of imitating human emotions, but not like in a human way. It was more like very categorical of like, oh, you bat your eyelashes when you look at your crush or something like that. Those aren't like actual examples, but like smiling to show that you're happy, or looking away when you're uncomfortable, like those kinds of kind of like bullet pointed reactions of a human is what was simulated by this Kismet, but kind of looks a little bit like the robot, because it was a proof of concept, kind of looks like a either a troll or one of those like funny looking dolls. But yeah, it kind of looks a little funny. But I thought it was super duper cool because 2001 they were already able to do this. Plus, women in tech, I love representation. Awesome. So someone talked about competitive chess, and using AI to simulate chess. I thought that was really cool. Awesome. Now I'm going to go into how I personally started in AI. Um, What you will see on the right, I like to call my cursed images because so I was an intern at a research lab in a university in 2017 to 2018. I hadn't even graduated high school yet. Like my graduation was end of June 2017, and the research lab was already like on my butt trying to onboard me and like get me started before my graduation date. So that was a little like amusing to me. But I was in biomedical research. Like I was going to go into BS biology or bachelor's in biology. I was going to go get a PhD. I prior to this, I did programs in biomedical engineering as well as virology. Fun fact, the virology lab that I worked in 2016 ended up being like one of the forefronts in the American research into COVID-19. And I thought that was the coolest thing. But yeah, so I was really set in like biomedical research. And then I got assigned, not assigned, kind of like matched with this research lab that was more so in, right? Dr. Issa, nice. I was matched with a lab that was more that where one not the PI, not the principal investigator. So if anyone is not familiar with how academia works, let me know and I'll go into it. But otherwise, I'm gonna like talk with an understanding, with an assumption that you understand what I'm talking about. But so the PI was primarily in magnetic resonance spectroscopy. That's what this thing is. So this is proton magnetic resonance spectroscopy. This is the bulky title of my paper that didn't get published. But the lab itself was in magnetic resonance spectroscopy, which is like the same machine that uses that makes MRIs, but instead of a picture, it's measurements. So like how much of a brain chemical you have. And one of the PhD candidates, postdoc, wanted to see how data science could be applied to their data. So some things that were considered were I don't understand the emojis. Translate it for me and I will respond. But this was, again, I was in biology. I had no idea what programming was. I had no idea I mean, I had some idea, but it wasn't like a formal understanding of programming. And then I just jumped straight into data science and R, coming from a researcher's perspective. Um, at leading up to this, at most I did. Oh, it's going over your head. Okay, if you have specific questions that you want me to backtrack about, totally let me know. I didn't know any data science, I didn't know any programming, and then wham, I'm going into using R, which is a programming language that's specifically for data science and almost entirely used by researchers. Maybe that's why it's R for research. But my job was to take the data that they had on, so it says frontal cortex metabolites. What's that? All that is brain chemicals in the front of your brain. So the part of your brain that does, actually that's not relevant, but applying frontal cortex metabolites, so brain chemical levels that were quantified by a magnetic resonance spectroscopy machine thing. So yes, and then we had healthy patients as well as patients with multiple sclerosis. And then we had to figure out, based on their brain metabolite data, what kind of MS do they have? So this was like diagnosis. Because I learned throughout this research that you can't just say I made a diagnostic tool that is scoffed at. And people are very skeptical. And like, I remember when I started to write this paper after I did my research, the the mental gymnastics I had to go through to phrase it in a way that wasn't presumptuous. Like, for example, my research. So this was bonkers in the sense that it wasn't like very, it wasn't um accurate enough. Like the my data set was so small because we had to only work with the patients of this research lab. We didn't have access to anyone else's medical data, only the ones that they themselves collected. And that was like at most 90 patients. Imagine making a machine learning model with 90 data points from scratch. So that was like from the get go, if you knew how a little bit about data science, you would kind of like see that it wouldn't have been statistically significant in any way, shape, or form if I had a data set of 90, because then I'd have to whittle that down to my training set, my data set, my test set, and my validation set. So that's already what, like 50 in my training at most. Um, so um, what you'll see on the right is, so I did this internship in 2017. That laptop is from 2007. I was working on a 10-year-old laptop, doing machine learning. So I remember I would wait an hour for one, like if I would do, what was my code? Like I would check for the confusion matrix. I remember my words now. Like checking to see if the model's predictions matched what the original or what the actual data was. Like check the predictions. That's what I'm trying to say. Um, it would take an hour just to check my work, not even to do my work. um, So validation accuracy went down the hill. Yes, absolutely. I think the highest accuracy I got was what, 70-ish%, which you would never want to bring up to any patient. Like you don't want to tell them I have a 70% chance of telling you what you have. um so my data wasn't like my work wasn't really like useful. I learned a lot from it, and it was a good proof of concept, I guess. And while I was making this project, right? Yes, it was very slow. It was from 2007 during 2017, dude. Sorry, friend. But the another like difficulty that I faced with this machine learning research is that while looking through all of the other like publications, so my brain was at the time like hardwired to look through publications and like reading research papers, and I was looking through some of the like peers of this laboratory, and I saw that not a lot of people were looking into data science within biomedical research. Like this was a new idea. That's why they were able to give it away to a barely college freshman who didn't know any programming. And I was the only person on the project, by the way. Like I had no one to help me. So it was, as I'm saying it out loud, kind of felt like a throwaway project, but and but it would have been cutting edge if I just had enough data and or had a faster computer. Um, but the but yeah, so I didn't see a lot of other people doing it at the time, and this was like fairly novel, and that's why there wasn't a lot of it wasn't people weren't as receptive of it. So I saw someone say that there are separate fields for data science in biomed. If you know more about this, or if you have any things that I can read to know more about it, please send them my way or send them in the chat or whatever. I would love to see how it actually was versus, because this is from my perspective. This slide is entirely just my perspective. But yeah. Oh, the screen isn't. Oh, shoot. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Oh, no. It's okay. I hope you can still hear me at least, even if the screen is frozen. But I want to go into. So that was my introduction into biomedical research and machine learning. And from that, some things that I learned about like how tech works within biomed and health, because biomedical research versus healthcare are separated enough where healthcare, it you don't have to do a lot of research for it. It's more like for the individual, like for the people, like whatever. Sorry, going back to the prevalence within either biomedical research or within healthcare, I found moves slower than others, like it versus education or versus manufacturing or supply chain or business or what have you. And some considerations that I found were data privacy, differences in kind of like who's in charge, as well as bigger consequences. For data privacy, I will go very in depth into that when we go into bioethics, because HIPAA, or basically the law that says healthcare information is private. Oh, maybe that's what HIP part, that part stands for. But basically, what that meant, for example, for my research, is that I wasn't allowed to know who the patients are, of course, any identifying information, and ooh, thank you. That is what HIPAA stands for. And I wasn't allowed. I had to go through training, and the reason why they gave me the 2007 um, laptop was because that data was only supposed to be in that laptop, nowhere else. Um, so even though they already covered their bases with HIPAA by removing any identifying information, they covered even more bases by giving me only one machine to work with that was not connected to, for example, the cloud where data would have been stored otherwise. So I worked entirely off of an Excel sheet. I also printed everything. Oh, I never even got to tell you. So here I had a very old computer, I mentioned I didn't know programming. So my very intellectual self printed out documentation. So I went to the R documentation website. They had pages on specific models like decision trees and conditional inference and all of that stuff. And I printed it out. I used a handy dandy white highlighter, and then I just like super old school. And now I know better, and now I have a mechanical keyboard and two screens and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, that was a funny little stepping point from my career. Right, like printed out documentation, fun stuff. Awesome. So going back, oh, we're still here. So data privacy, EHR, for those who, yeah, that's why they gave me the laptop. Another point for data privacy is electronic health records. Sometimes they're called electronic medical records. Um, there are, oh, Wombo sent an NIH article. Awesome. I am going to, I have no idea how to like, gosh, okay. I will keep that in mind. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Thank you. So electronic health records is another thing. So uh, I've noticed in the different places that I've gone to the hospital, they almost always have different EHRs. So one like difficulty with that is they might not be compatible as easily. So for example, I want to send my health records from this hospital and I'm moving across the country to this hospital. It might not transfer as easily where it can just be like wham. Similarly, once we're going into AI research, because they're in different EHRs or EHR softwares, the data is not going to be the same. So a lot of cleaning is going to need to be done on that part. So that's it for data privacy. Generational or hierarchical differences. When I like talk to folks who are actually using the electronic health record, so I asked nurses, sometimes the medical scribes or dental hygienists, etc. Like their electronic health records, like it based on their anecdotes, they were saying that a lot of people don't like that software, or they have specific things that would make their flow easier. But the folks who make the decisions don't make those decisions. Sometimes because they're older, or because the hierarchy is too far apart, or maybe it could be a financial decision where the folks on the board might not see much benefit in transferring to a more updated system, stuff like that. Um, and then there's also bigger consequences where if an electronic health record goes down, that's like a whole hospital not having access to information that they need. Or in our case with artificial intelligence, what if the model is inaccurate? Who do we blame? You know, that kind of stuff. I'm going into that with the ethics side slide. But the summary for this, for the bigger consequences stuff, is point is that people usually think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Where folks don't think it's worth modernizing. That's the word I want to use. It Biomedical research and healthcare are one of those, are a few of those fields where modernization is has been a little bit harder to penetrate, I guess. So a quote that I got from some of my research is that the protection of those hospital softwares, the Wi-Fi at the health facilities, all of that kind of stuff, from AI-driven malware and personalized attack would perhaps cost more than what can be saved by the application of such systems. So those are some other things. Security is another concern when it comes to making technology more prevalent within healthcare. Cool. So, however, there have been advances in biomedicine as well as health, where, for example, telemedicine like shot right up once we had the pandemic, because there was literally no other choice. So because of how the state of the world was, the field was forced into progress with that front. We also have precision medicine, CRISPR, and other advances within genetics. This was where I was going to go into before going into tech, actually. CRISPR-Cas9 first came out around, not first came out, but like first became prevalent around 2017-ish, I guess, like around that time. And that is, to those unfamiliar, gene editing, basically being able to manipulate your genetics. At first, it was just a proof of concept, and then now I'm not so sure where they are in terms of getting it to the person, to people, or human testing. But that is some advancement. There's also precision medicine, which is based on your genetics. Let us be precise with your medication. Um, a small way that I've seen this in action is folks who need psych meds, like antidepressants, antipsychotics, etc. There is a test that you can take which shows what meds might work on you better than others, but they're still within the same category. Like generics versus generic versus brand names. Like which ones would work on you better based on your genetic makeup. We also have the advancement of wearable technology and health apps. I found that very helpful for like so someone asked about reverse engineering, but I don't know what the question is specifically. So clarify that while I go into wearable tech. So the advantage of wearable technology is not only that it tracks your health. So for someone like me that doesn't remember very well but has a lot of symptoms that I need to track, the wearables are super helpful, so I don't have to think about it. And I would be able to show my doctors, okay, here is a very specific example of when my heart rate shot up or I had arrhythmia or something like that. And I won't just have to recount the experience, but I have actual tangible proof of the experience. there is also 3D printing. We can now literally print out body parts, not body parts. I think the furthest we've gone is organs, as well as veins or blood vessels, skin. Um, but I don't think we've had anything as complicated as multiple organ systems put together. Reverse engineering the human DNA. I think we have the full human. Do we even have the whole human genome? Do we currently have the whole human genome? Oh, it is complete. I guess the next step there would be actually using it. Yeah. Oh, that is a very great segue into my next bullet point, where I think my personal observation is that the problem is getting from discovery to widespread use and then ultimately equitable access. Um, where, for example, yes, we have, for example, discovered 3D printing meat, or 3D, or I guess I'm not gonna, don't quote me on this, but apparently we've reverse engineered the human DNA. So that discovery is great, amazing, like amazing progress. However, what do we do with it? Um, getting it to a place where everyone can use it has so many roadblocks along the way, where um, for example, let's say 3D printing a 3D printing. Let's start there. We started with blood vessels. We moved into organs, and while that's cool, there's the research that went into it was like, okay, material science of like the actual printing, and then biology, which is the connecting of, for example, the blood vessel to the muscle or whatever. And then we go into actually putting it in a human being. So first we go through um, maybe petri dish testing or like lab testing, and then we go into animal testing, and then eventually human testing. But it's a very steep like climb between those steps, because at going back to a previous slide, we were talking about bigger consequences. Testing an artificial vein in the lab versus testing it in a monkey, for example, there is now life on the line. Um, Once we start into human testing, now we have human life on the line, and then because we too are humans, that gets a little like scary in our brains. Um, but a tangible example of how that road is hard is, for example, breast cancer AI research done by DeepMind. I mentioned earlier how Google didn't make AlphaGo. Google is owned by Alphabet, who also owns DeepMind, who made AlphaGo. So DeepMind is the folks who made AlphaGo and breast cancer research. So they first publicized that they were going to work on breast cancer AI in 2017. I looked them up. There isn't a lot about it after that. I had to like Wikipedia hop into like different articles and then publications, etc., until I found on DeepMind's blog their research was published in 2020, and the TLDR of their paper was 12% more accurate than radiologists. So they had like a few radiologists look at the same stuff that the AI model was looking at, and then compared how they did. So not only was it more accurate, but it also reduced the workload of the radiologists, because you have to double check or sometimes triple check the diagnoses. It reduced the workload by 88%. And that was in 2020. I'm pretty sure we're at 2023 right now. And the amount of time that it took to create the AI is probably shorter than the amount of time it's going to take to get the AI to everyone. So we're still so far removed from it actually being used in some hospitals, and even more so from it being used by everyone. And I guess that's some of the point that I'm trying to make with technology within biomedical research and healthcare. Um, it's a lot slower here than, for example, it was pretty easy getting, I don't know, teachers on using technology when they're in their classrooms or in manufacturing, for example. Somewhere that I interned used Internet of Things and that kind of technology to measure like the factory floor and like all of those metrics and stuff. Uh, that is also data heavy, but since no life is directly on the line, like I mean, it could get dangerous, but like it's not as life or death. That's why it's much easier there in those fields than care. So, with that in mind, I think I'm on to the part where I kind of just ramble. And I would love to hear from the group with this part where we talk about AI related considerations in bioethics. Because as we've shown, as we've seen so far, I don't know everything, and some of y'all can fill the gaps that I have. So, some things that I wanted to bring up include jumping through HIPAA hoops to use electronic health record entries within big data. There's also, who do we blame if the AI gets a diagnosis wrong? That would be the concept of liability. Like, who is liable for the AI when it gets it's wrong? Like, is it the doctor who was helped by the AI? Is it the hospital who like brought the AI to their patients? Is it the programmer who developed the AI? Is it the researcher, like the postdocs and the PIs who um, did the research behind the AI? Like, who is liable? Like, who's to blame for that? I also wanted to talk about, should patients know if AI is used in their care? So, informed consent. HIPAA hoops is what I call the, like, you know how the phrase is you jump through hoops to get somewhere? Like, it's difficult to get through HIPAA, as like they have a lot of rules that hinder you from doing things, including getting medical records in research. Yeah, loopholes in HIPAA. Yes, thank you. That's what I meant by HIPAA hoops. Think it would be better if AI is used as intervention rather than diagnosis for the time being. That's a good point. Yeah. Um, I think what that is kind of, wait, intervention, define intervention, because what I understood with your statement there is that it'll help but not take over, kind of. But intervention could also mean like before it happens, do something about it, like preventative care. Um, that could be another route with the AI, but it looks like Dawn is saying I was on it the first time with helping with the diagnosis instead of creating the diagnosis themselves. And I do think that is what DeepMind did with their brain cancer research. I'm sorry, breast cancer research, where the radiologists would, like, when they compared it to the radiologists, like medical opinions or medical, what's the word for it? Like politically correct word for it. But basically, what the radiologist said, it was more so clarifying or confirming as opposed to this is what it is. Awesome. I guess another thing. Oh, okay. So Another consideration for AI in biology or in medicine is the biases. Like, I know that, for example, in recommendation systems or like job app AI things, the biases can stop you from getting a job or can get you like off the list for certain opportunities. But in this case, these biases are much like, no, even if it's such a small bias, it could potentially get someone killed. Like, some things that come to mind include um, research into neurodiversity is currently lacking, in the sense that folks currently, like DSM-5, the textbook from the American Psychology Association, has said that it is, I think 2013 was the last time it was updated. No, when was DSM-5 when did DSM-5 come out? Yeah, DSM-5, the textbook on all things psychological or like mental illnesses, is from 2013. So the most recent diagnostic tool for, in this case, I'm talking about autism and ADHD. The most recent diagnostic tool that is not, I don't want to say universally, maybe nationally or internationally regarded, is from 2013. But we have come to understand since 2013 that most of the research is biased. So most autism research is on young boys, and ADHD research is on boys in general. And so I started looking into how women who are neurodivergent, who either have ADHD or um, autism, go through this thing called masking, where they basically hide that they have the symptoms of neurodivergence, like um, ADH hyperactivity, the hyperactivity of ADHD. Because the research was only on boys, they thought everyone who has ADHD has to be hyper, can't sit still, sits funny, etc. But then we are realizing that because of the bias of not seeing that women present it differently, we are now seeing that the hyperactivity in women with ADHD is actually overthinking. It's internalized. Like, our brain does not turn off. Um, and so we are still hyper, but you can't see it. So those going back to biases can literally get someone killed. There is research suggesting that or not suggesting, sorry, just like the point of the research was that um, folks who are diagnosed later in life with neurodivergence, or folks who um, were masking their entire life because they didn't realize that they were neurodivergent, end up unaliving themselves, are more likely to unalive themselves than anyone else. Or not anyone else, sorry, that's a bad thing, sorry, bad choice of words. But like, they're more likely to hurt themselves or other people or themselves, because those biases are Elizabeth Holmes. Who's that? I want to look into that. Elizabeth Holmes. Oh, I remember there was like a Netflix show on this person. Or is this a person? No. Oh. So she did biotech and it ended up being fraud, is the TLDR for folks who don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is. Okay. I'm gonna hop off my tangent on biases, and has gotten pretty advanced in diagnosing medical diseases if you train it well enough with good data to get fewer false negatives. I absolutely agree. Um, yeah, I agree. I guess some things to think about to get it further would be, because the data isn't always, for example, public. Like, when we do our hackathon projects and we look for data, we usually go to Kaggle and stuff like that. But a lot of the research could, like, more research could be done if, for example, we open source the data, but then HIPAA like regulations. Um, but then it could be argued that if the information or if the medical records are anonymized, there should be no issue. But then there is still an issue. I don't know what the argument for that part is, but yeah. Um, and then another point with Payne's uh, point is that the diagnostic part, I guess. But I'm gonna leave it there because I probably don't have a lot to say. But you have a good point. Yes. Is there any AI systems that's built to help patients to live their life better with their disease? I like where you're going with this, but I think I want to know a specific, like, what are you envisioning with living their life better with their disease? Because I can see that you're at least saying like improving quality of life as opposed to improving just like life in general. So Don is saying like a smart home assistant with special functions for MDD. Oh, what's MDD? MDD. Oh, major depressive disorder. Oh, so I mean that probably exists. Um, this kind of makes me want to go into like another talk that or another like session that I wanted to do for this week's AIML week was the difference between AI developing AI versus using AI tools. Because by creating a smart home assistant for like major depressive disorder, you'd be using an AI tool. Like the AI is already there, and you're kind of just reworking it for your use case. And a lot of the way that I'm explaining these like this AI research is like straight from scratch, that I've noticed folks who are used to AI tools might not realize. Like when my team and I for the American Sign Language project when we started looking into it, we realized that, for example, to recognize that this is a hand, first you gotta give it a bunch of hands and see that it's a hand, and then recognize that this is like a finger, etc. And then the steps for that, like I started looking into OpenTV. There's like you do one function for rotating the image and then another function for Gaussian blurs, and then there's the depth perception part of computer vision, and then there's like and then there's image recognition versus image classification, like telling what it is versus which pixels on the image is a dog. Like that kind of stuff is often lost to folks who are more used to tools. Cool. So that is, thank you so much for saying that, because I was worried about it not being a relevant enough topic. But if you want to tune into that, I'm pretty sure it's at Wednesday, but I will come back to you with specific information. I have to backtrack. They would know. Y'all talking amongst yourselves. I love that. But if you have something just for me, let me know. But yeah, so this is where I was supposed to backtrack. Informing the patients about the use of AI would kind of resolve the issue of liability. The school used to make us sign a consent form that we were responsible for any untoward incident on the trip. Yeah, that would make sense. I remember there was this paper when ChatGPT, like between the release of ChatGPT and the investment of Microsoft into OpenAI, thereby privatizing ChatGPT. There was this paper where a mental health startup, going back to Don's idea on MDD, like this startup it was kind of like a BetterHelp. To those unfamiliar, it's kind of like online therapy. But that one, I think, was peer related. Like, people aren't allowed to give diagnoses, and some of them might not have very specific like graduate degrees in psychology. So that startup did a, I think they chalked it off to social experiment. um, but they basically used chat gpt for some of the responses, and they were saying, "Oh, it's so cool. People didn't realize that they were talking to AI and they thought it was better. And we improved the response time to like how many seconds." And then the moment people realized that people learned that it was AI, they flipped. Um, and I think going back to Don't Know's point about informing, it was more so they probably were mad that they didn't know it was AI versus that they were talking to AI at all. You know? I see. Awesome. So it's so the yeah, so the going back to that social experiment by the startup, the mental health startup, it was that oh, no, I think that was the end of my point. Cool. Um Yeah. And then this is a paper that I found on artificial intelligence in healthcare, which was more like a summary style paper as opposed to presenting their new research. Basically, this group summarized what they saw in the applications of artificial intelligence that they saw within healthcare. Granted, this was in 2019, which I'm starting to realize is a little too old. But yeah, so some of the points that I'm making, I'm realizing is like a dang old age getting to me type of thing where technology moves so fast and like I blink for a second and then all of these like advancements happen, and like sometimes I struggle to keep up. Like someone in the chat earlier was saying that we do have the human genome already all complete and usable. And I just didn't keep up with that specific part. And like there's so much to keep up with, I guess, is the point that I was eventually got to. But yeah, is there anything else in terms of, I guess, AI considerations? Because this is my, yeah, yep, this is my last slide. If you guys have any other bioethics topics you guys want to bring up, absolutely. It is absolutely overwhelming. Thank you that you understand. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about, I don't know, my cursed image or the history of AI, oh, I'm gonna do this. Q&A. Ask any questions in the chat. Cool. I'm just gonna leave it like that, and then I'll ramble.
It's 2 p.m. Hope you're having a good day. Want to go for a walk?
Oh, I don't know if you guys heard that, but because mentioned something about smart home assistant for MDD, it's not specifically for MDD, but um it has helped my mental health to tell my Google Home to remind me to take a walk or drink water or stuff like that. Um, is it worth it being a data scientist? Honestly, yes. Um, I have gone in and out of data science since 2017. My biggest problem with data science back then was, boy, there just wasn't enough research. Like, I had nothing to work with. Remember what I said? I had like 90 data points total. Um, and when I would do data projects at hackathons, I would get annoyed at how Kaggle was either insufficient or messy. Like I'd have to do a lot of data cleaning, and like one of my first projects at a hackathon, I didn't know how to do stuff, so I like got friendly with Excel. Um, but like now there is I'm coming to understand from the folks in the chat that there is enough data out there already. um, it's more like the access to that data. But if you work for a company and they give you the data to work with, yeah, you're good. Um, and they do have their own proprietary data most of the time. Um, Another point for if it's worth it being a data scientist, money, y'all get paid well. There's not as much competition as software engineering because data science requires statistics and programming, as well as ideally an understanding of the background of the data. Like as a biomedical researcher, I understood the data, so I wouldn't just like blindly make up models. Like I would know that, for example, I would want to give heavier weight on creatine or glutamine, or I'm just pulling brain metabolite names. Um, but yeah, it's worth it. It's tedious. And you do need a lot of knowledge, but yes, it's worth it. Going into which ML or DL algorithms mostly used in bio, I think I'm going to defer from this question and instead give you. I remember someone else is doing ML versus DL versus AI in their session because I'm outdated apparently. Um, and when I started in 2017, it was a lot of conditional inference and decision trees. Recursive partitioning, conditional inference was like what was being used, and now it's probably much different. But usually, I think I can at least say that in biology, we tend to go for something a little more binary, like yes, no, um, versus something with a lot of classes. That way, there isn't a lot of like in terms of accuracy and in terms of like what yeah, like because remember we talked about how lots and lots of classes could ask for more computational power. So if you go for like decision trees that are just binary, something like that, um, are sometimes preferred because of that reason. Cool. Have y'all ever tried those AI friends for lonely people? um to be honest, yeah, they're not very friendly. They're very bot-y. Just made me lonelier. So nah, not a fan. How do they work with privacy regulations? Usually there aren't a lot of considerations for privacy with the AI friends because, I mean, you don't have privacy regulations with your normal friends, so it wouldn't make much sense to be um, like private with an app that's just friends. Um, I think yeah, yeah, there's just no regulations for that part. So I'm just going down the list. So I know that there's a wall of text somewhere down there. I'll get to you eventually. How can AI help us with situations like the COVID pandemic? Which part? If you mean the research into cures and treatments, then big data would be a way for AI to help us. I remember I mentioned that the virology lab that I worked with in 2016 is now one of the forefronts in COVID research. So if they put AI in their virology research, I bet that would speed things up a little bit. Um, but going back to Don's point, it would not replace, it would augment, it would improve, it would add on to, where the researchers will make the final decisions. And it's just speeding up of the research that AI can help with. But another part with helping with the COVID pandemic could be, for example, like, oh, this is a good example of like healthcare versus biomedical research. Because for example, people not exercising because they were stuck in lockdown is definitely not a biomedical research question, or could be, I guess, like long term effects, but it's more so a healthcare issue, right? Like the overall health of a human being. That can also be supported by artificial intelligence. For example, the smart home assistant that you can talk to that will remind you to go outside and drink water. There's also research into, for example, the economic effect of the pandemic. Excuse me. And how we can bounce back from, for example, the pandemic caused a lot of supply chain issues. Like, not only was there trouble making the product, but getting the product to the place that it's supposed to get to. AI can help with, for the supply chain stuff, I guess, scheduling or logistical stuff with supply chain. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole yet, but that's just like preliminary stuff. But yeah, that is some ways that AI can help us with the COVID pandemic. What projects do you recommend getting into when starting with AI in research or healthcare? How do we even begin to get unique ideas for these projects? How do you find ideas in the space that has already been done in order to avoid redundant project ideas? So, my question for you, Muz, I'm going to call you Muz because that's the only syllable that looks pronounceable. What are you doing it for? If you're doing a hackathon project, I'm going to give you the grimace emoji and tell you that that might not be the best course of action because there's nothing you can finish in 24 hours that would make statistical significance. And like, ooh, someone is currently working as a data scientist. Natural language processing, cool. Shift to bio research and healthcare. Instead of using already available algorithms, awesome. Okay, so I heard you. I'm coming back to you. But I just want to get to the point of like, if you want to go healthcare, biomedicine, artificial intelligence, these research areas are harder to get into in a short amount of time. Like these are like commitments. Like you gotta commit to these when you do research. Same thing with like data science as a whole. If you're doing more than just analyzing data for a tech company, like personal like finance data, for example, if you're trying to do research for the government or for academia, it's a whole different like playing field. And it's more of an investment. That's kind of why what I didn't want to go into research anymore because I was like, I don't like grad school. So because you need grad school to get into to have a voice in research, it kind of doesn't like make sense much anymore for me. But yeah, so if you're doing it for a hackathon project, I want to iterate that it doesn't have to be brand new. Like these hackathon projects, we don't like MLH policy. We don't check for commercial viability. We don't check for absolute originality. We don't look for, I don't know, go to market strategies or whatever. You could submit a to-do list in a hackathon and it would still be like a hackathon project. Whereas if you Muzz are looking more for a personal project that you take into an interview for, I don't know, Pfizer or Columbia or NYU or whatever, then what I would suggest to get ideas for those kinds of projects is start with a problem. Start with a problem that you want to solve or that you know has limited solutions and then go from there. This is the same advice I give for like any brainstorming for project ideas. Start with a problem. And then start learning how to read publications like this kind of stuff. Like knowing how to look for the DOIs and like reading the abstracts and not reading the rest until the abstract is something that you actually would use. Because sometimes a pitfall is that we read way into the paper and then bam, we don't even need it. Like these are just basic research skills that I've learned over the years. But yeah, maybe, yeah. So that is for that question. I'm going into bracelets that measure your heart rate to see. Okay, cool. I'm going into pains. If you want to go into research creating your own algorithms, it would make sense. Okay, so would you do you care about the algorithms or do you care about the applications? Because like my thought process with this is like you would want to know not just the algorithms, but also how they apply in your specific use case. So, for example, a decision tree might be more helpful with multiple sclerosis, but might not apply as well to neurodivergence. Maybe because of how many classes there are, or how many um, like because it's a spectrum, maybe the classifications are going to be a little different. So applications, so then I would want to think about where your background knowledge is. Like if you know a lot about the environment and therefore plastics and climate change and all of that fun stuff, then going into research there and seeing how models or algorithms or research is done there would be a good, like, start with where you want to use your algorithms is what I'm trying to say, I guess. um the oh, okay, so someone asked for a recap. My solution to that, because I kind of just went all over the place, sorry about that, is I'm gonna put these slides up on my link tree. I can do that right now because I usually promise y'all that I do that and I forget. So I'm going to share this with y'all. Um, you're gonna see share and then just view. Cool. So that is my summary. I am sorry that I cannot give you a better one. Um, cool. So going back to applications and how to get into researching artificial intelligence versus using artificial intelligence. Um, if you want to go into, oh, because Payne said that they're in natural language processing. Um, if you using NLP versus making NLP, the differences there could be, for example, grammar and linguistics and translation and localization, like those topics would be where I think you could like look into. Like, do you care about that kind of stuff? Um, one like constant throughout whichever application you want to use or whichever algorithm you want to use is you're probably going to need grad school. You are likely, because if you go into research, if you have a master's, you can get into the lab. If you get a PhD, it is only with a PhD that you can become a principal investigator, which is the person who is in charge of the whole laboratory or the whole research like wing per se, and they get to decide where the research goes. They get to decide, their hypotheses are like what's tested. Um, but like for example, as a student with a bachelor's in biology versus like I would be like using petri dishes and what's the thing, the micropipette I think is the word. Like I would be pipetting everything all day and I wouldn't even have a chance to propose my own hypotheses or do more than, I don't know, write proofreading the paper as opposed to writing new stuff or like writing just a section if I'm lucky with the bachelor's, and then it gets better as a master's, and then way better once you have a PhD or I don't know, multiple PhDs. But yeah, so he said thanks, or they said thanks. I'm going to move on to my next question, which is how to make health tech AI projects sustainable in the initial stage when going into public site and public customer is still far away. Oh, okay. we're going into a little bit of entrepreneurship, which is also a rabbit hole that I've gone down before. But this would go into moonshots. Like, if you've heard of the term moonshot before, they're kind of like hard tech, they're kind of cutting edge. And usually these kinds of projects are investment heavy in the beginning, and it's almost always hard to do, for example, agile methodology with health tech, because you need a lot upfront as opposed to being able to do things iteratively, if that makes sense. If not, let me know. But because there's a lot upfront, people are or investors are usually skeptical about investing in health tech or any health related or biology related like project. In terms of like, if you already know like why it's hard, how to overcome it would be, um, make your proof of concept as small as possible, but as relevant as possible. Like, don't make an MVP of, for example, you said smart home assistant. Like, if your MVP is that chatbot, make sure that it actually does the core of your product. Like, don't leave the main feature for after the MVP, you know? Um, and then once you have that, you are better equipped to pitch your project to people. While you're leading up to it, though, like before you have, because when you say public customer and public site, I'm thinking about FDA approval. I'm thinking about getting it to the people's hands. Um, and in order to do that, you'd have to be super duper sure to even just consider FDA approval, for example. Um, and it requires a lot of investment upfront to get to FDA approval. I don't even know what the process is for that, but I'm assuming like you got to pay for it and you got to wait a while and like the bureaucracy and all of that fun stuff. Um, but with another if invest like a way to talk to investors when you don't have a complete product yet. So this extends to anyone with like an entrepreneurship interest. uh Try to figure out what your investor is interested in, or like what kind of investor you want to attract. So for example, if you're interested in an investor that is kind of like hands off but throws you a lot of money, you would want to focus on investment, or like how long it's going to take for them to get their money back and how much are they getting back, like that kind of stuff. If you're interested in that kind of investor, if you're interested in an investor that, for example, is a subject matter expert and would be able to give you advice, then show that you know your product. Show that you've done your research, that you know what you're talking about. And it's also about knowing what you're talking about and talking like you know what you're talking about. So confidence. You got to believe in your product as much as you want others to believe in your product. Um, Another point, if you want the kind of investor that is, oh, I currently work for, I'm currently leading a Tech Together hackathon. A lot of the initiatives within Tech Together is very values based. So when we look for sponsors, we look for someone who is values aligned, is the term that I've learned. And basically, what that means is they care about what you care about. In Tech Together's case, it's gender diversity. In, let's say, Dawn's case, if like just following her like their train of thought, it would be an investor that cares about mental health, or maybe if you want to be a little bit removed from it, maybe they don't intentionally create mental health products, but it could be that you see that this company takes care of the mental health of their employees. has mental health initiatives, I don't know, pays for people's headspace subscription, that kind of stuff. But being values aligned, showing the impact, that's the word I think I want to like bring home, showing the impact of your project, either based on current traction, um, would be a good way of getting there. Um, where, for example, I haven't had people use my product yet, but based on a survey, this many people would want to use it. Or in our research, these many people got 50% more focused on their work. Therefore, we can help these many people with ADHD all over the world. Focusing on impact would be another good way of getting to those investors. Um, cool. My list of questions has ended. Does anyone have any last minute things? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up and kind of like thank y'all for listening to me ramble and hope that you got something from this. Kind of got like too comfy and set, like unnormal. But yeah. Hope this helped. I hope y'all learned a thing or two. I am going to come back with information on creating versus creating AI versus using AI. And yeah, awesome. No one else added to the chat, so I'm gonna say thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate the interactions and the participation, etc. And I will see y'all next time, or just all around in the Discord. Thank you. Bye. Or bye.